Does anybody remember in 2015 and 16 when there was an announcement by a group of very wealthy people in the tech sector that they were going to take up immigration reform and that they were going to engage a process of trying to create a political momentum around reconsiderations of immigration in America? Does anybody remember that? I remember I became interested in finding out what they were talking about. I looked at their primary announcement. It's like a big announcement that they made. And there were certain people that they had listed specifically as being head of certain tech companies that had quite a reputation in the tech sector. And I already knew by this point that a lot of immigrants had been used in processes of human test subject experimentation, specifically around security features, technologies associated with security, including border security, port security, harbor security, including in regards to law enforcement, including in regards to surveillance, including in regards to sophisticated forms of identification, including biometric identification, and that this had gone back for more than a decade, even prior to the time that they made this announcement, and that indeed a big part of what happened in 2005, 2006, when there were protests throughout the United States by immigrants and immigrants' rights activists, and what happened during the 2008 presidential campaign had a lot to do with the manners in which specifically immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, were used in the development of very important technologies that we now take for granted. Specifically, one of the things that I had acknowledged when I was working on a third party political campaign was that early versions of the DREAM Act had a sort of rider attached or within the DREAM Act itself that talks specifically about border security and relationships with the Transportation Security Administration. And it was distinct and different from other elements of the DREAM Act. And if you look for versions of the DREAM Act, even what is alleged to be the original DREAM Act, you do not find this information that was included at the time in the original version of the DREAM Act specific to security and border security issues connected to the and through the Transportation Security Administration, TSA, that were going on around the same time that a lot of people addressing matters connected to immigration were also dealing with the implementation of the E-Verify program. And a lot of the concerns around E-Verify were not just about fear that you would be caught without your documents trying to get a job. It also had to do with the kinds of technology that were being used and the fact that there was a rampant problem at the time where immigration officials specifically were mixing up the identities of the people they were allegedly trying to arrest or detain and even deport. That people that had names that were similar to the names that were on the warrant were being misidentified by address. So the wrong people were being rounded up. The problem is, once you get rounded up and you get detained, you get processed through the system, which may also include fingerprinting at the least, if not the capture of other biological or biometric data. And if you're detained and you're pending a proceeding, you may have to address factors connected to being in jail or being in detention, and you may have need for a bail bond, which means you need to find a way to make the money to pay the bond in order to get you out of that facility while you're there. That can impact your job, that can impact your housing, and if you have a family, it can impact them as well. These are the matters that were going on during the 2008 presidential campaign for people that actually understood what the immigration rights movement was about at the time. These were material factors that ended up getting disappeared, as many of the people involved in the movement got disappeared once the original campaign promises of who allegedly won the election got dissipated within the first 100 days, and everything became about healthcare. So when I saw this group of people in tech discussing how they were going to start spearheading a campaign around immigration, and immigration rights, I contacted them directly. And I invoked these kind of considerations because my understanding is that the kind of people that get work visas to work in the tech sector or even the financial sector, A, often come from different parts of the world than the people we are supposed to target or identify as being the scourge of our refusal to deal with appropriate immigration policy. B, have a completely different class denomination than the people we by and large associate with immigration. C, allegedly have a specific political affinity or affiliation that is attempted for absorption or co optation by opportunists within the United States who want to recreate the immigrant experience in their political interest. And more than that, I believe there is a different kind of requirement for them to be allowed to stay in the country and also have a connection with their countries of origin that comes from being able to participate in something like the technology sector at that level and in that manner than for somebody that is classified in another manner and their participation in the technology sector at that level. Now, we have not heard about that consortium. That has not been a part of the political discourse for at least the last 2.5, 3 years. That group of people, their aims, their efforts. But what we have had is at least twice, Mark Zuckerberg specifically, who was one of the leaders in this political movement of people in tech around immigration reform, being brought before Congress in what is nothing more than a complete bastardization of anything actually appropriate concerning the relationship people in this country or around the world have to technology. If you read through the transcripts or look through what they did during that first hearing, what they did is they intentionally misspoke his name, almost as if they were making some sort of comic relief of it, which has the effect in another dimension for people who understand of creating separate and distinct cryptos for the actual individual members of Congress that decided they were going to engage in some sort of joking gamesmanship and try to humiliate him without ever getting to the points of the matter. And the major point of the matter is what kind of intangible property obligation are people that immigrate to this country required to adhere to via the relationship with the State Department specifically, but also via their relationship with the State Department to every other department in the United States. Because let me tell you, if you take a born American citizen and you swap my identity out with somebody that's not a born American citizen, but for whatever reason allegedly was in the country legally, it is completely contemptible and unconscionable. And I understand at some point somebody thought they would teach somebody a lesson and get paid for it, by the way, and probably pay them by trying to make an example out of me. And I'm not the only one. Somebody should have been honest and forthright about this. I understand that if you immigrate to this country, or if you try to get a job in this country through a work visa, that there are allowed to be captures on intangible property contribution of immigrants, and I believe their children, that are reabsorbed and recirculated through the government. And it's one of the reasons why, A, their countries of origin don't seem to complain, because they obviously get some sort of kickback in order to do it. I believe in the form of military assistance. It probably does come from people that are actually born in the United States. It's part of some 10% foreign assistance requirement. It's part of treaties going back to the 50s. But more than that, there's also the understanding that other people born in the United States are illegally accessed as State Department assets under the pretenses of any number of other areas, which also at this point now seems to include the pension system, but specifically is connected to our alleged energy paradigm, which is completely unconstitutional, unconscionable, and is a blemish upon the entire planet insofar as anybody or anything that would consider themselves to be a legitimate nation state or governmental entity in a nation state has allowed it to persist. I don't know what happened to that original effort. I don't know what happened to them. I do know that the 2 times that they called Zuckerberg before Congress so that they could humiliate him and set up crypto feeds, including trying to do some disgusting lady vengeance hijacking of the Libra crypto, is completely unacceptable. Because what you've done is you've actually completely disempowered actual women in leadership, women in their everyday lives. And for a lot of people that are leaders, you've tried to get us to agree, to accede to accepting whatever the hell you think you're going to characterize artificial intelligence as on your tax return, or your operating budget, or your proxy statement. It's not artificial intelligence. You stole from us and you're too cheap to pay us. What does that say about your value? And I think that's the point here. You don't get to keep hijacking our bandwidth so that you can try to command us into compliance with your bankruptcy.